just, hey, we're all here because of that common purpose, which is difference matters. Being the other is actually a special thing, and it's something to be celebrated, because otherwise, if you're not different, you're not standing out.
Today's episode is sponsored by Etched Communication, a full-service public relations and crisis management firm. Connect with Etched via its website at etchedcom.com, etchedcom.com.
I'm so excited to have our guest here with us today. The last time we were together on camera was a couple of years ago when we were actually doing our last episode of Pink Petro TV. This is my guest and my good friend, Katie Mehnert, the CEO and founder of Pink Petro and Experience Energy. And I can't believe that I'm finally getting to sit down and talk to you on Our Voices Matter.
It's amazing to be here. I miss being with you on camera, so it's fun to be back, and it's always fun to have conversations with Linda.
Well, ditto, my friend. So, gosh, there's so much that we can talk about. So, first thing, Pink Petro, a big-time energy disruptor, okay? Really working toward gender equality in the energy industry through the energy transition. What made you decide to do this, Katie?
So, interestingly enough, I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, which, as you know, is about women owning their seat at the table. I read the book back in 2013 when it launched on a flight to London. And the question was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Very powerful question. I absolutely got sick. I was nursing myself on saltines and Sprite for 4 days in a very fancy London hotel room, I might add. And then went to come back home and sat next to a gentleman who said to me, what's a pretty young lady like you doing in a dark, dangerous business like oil? And it was that moment that I knew that what I was doing at BP, while it was very important, it wasn't big enough for me, and that I needed to find a way to leap into this world of entrepreneurship and make a difference in the energy sector, and that's what we're doing.
So your career in energy started at Enron, yes?
It did.
And take us back. So, because you had 20 years in the business before you decided to start your company.
Just shy of that.
Okay.
You know, when I landed in Houston, it was to take a dream job. It was to work for Enron. It ended up that I was working for one of those companies that Enron was hiding money in under. Did not know that at the time. Landed in Houston just short of 9/11 and just short of the collapse when Enron imploded. And so, interestingly enough, yesterday went back to the Enron Tower for the first time, which is now occupied by Chevron, and eerily went up the stairs to the 49th floor, which is where I was meeting my host, and that was the floor I worked on. So I felt like I was
deja vu,
little ghost of Christmas past. You know, I could hear things, see things, albeit being 20 years older. But started at Enron and was always fascinated by the energy industry. But in the 80s, saw my father go through the boom bust cycle, which we've seen recently, but kind of against, I think, everyone's wishes, pursued the energy sector and haven't left since. It's just a passion. I think it's a fascinating place to work. I think it's a great place to work, and it's taken me all over the world.
So, it's interesting because one of the things that we talk about always on the show is what does it feel like to be on the outside, to be shunned, to be kind of the other? And there are lots of ways you can look at that. And I think that I want to ask your opinion about that as it relates to being in the energy industry, because big oil has such a negative, persona in so many parts of the globe. And you are someone who is trying to help change that narrative. So talk a little bit about what the narrative has been, what you think the reality is, and what it's like to be in an industry that a lot of people think is really evil.
So it's a great question, and it's actually what gets me up every day. Energy is the most misunderstood story of our lifetime, yet it is the most, it's the biggest economic opportunity of our lifetime. For generations, rural Americans, Americans in the oil field and in corporate centers have been powering generations of prosperity. And that's a pretty powerful thing. And I actually call that energy 1.0. So the boys went out to the field, they struck oil, everybody was doing well. I don't think people intentionally, when they set out to change the world, think they're going to do harm. It's kind of like the guys in the valley, the nerds in the valley, right? The guys in the garages that started, startups, Facebook, right? The guys that are creating apps to score chicks, right? Dates in college, they're having fun. Mm-hmm. But somewhere along the way, when you get big, things happen, right? The bad side happens. So obviously our climate is a challenge. Climate change is a reality, and no one's denying that. But for years, largely...
Some are denying
Some are still denying
Some
that.
are still denying it. But what you're saying is the industry itself is not
the industry
denying
has
it.
embraced it.
Yeah.
The industry has embraced the climate change and the energy transition. Where we stand to gain, I think, a huge opportunity is to educate people about the reality of what that transition truly is. Because there's some very fundamentally different ideologies. And then sadly, it's all very political, policy driven. My belief, though, is actually that I kind of call it E3, P3, and that is, I really believe that all forms of energy, we need to be equal in our view of that, okay? So all people, all energies, and really looking at our environment, that's what's going to drive this new economy. So it's environment equality that drives the economy. But we're not going to do that without people, passion, and a purpose for our planet. And I think that's what's unique here is that every single individual wants to see a future for their children and the next generation. We want to see that prosperity, manifest.
We all want. Yeah.
I'm excited to see that people are charged up about climate and energy. I'm excited that they want to talk about where their energy comes from.
I've got to say that, a lot of what's going on in terms of the conversation, you have really been making an impact in a very short amount of time, because your company is, 4 years old now?
We will be five in
March
March 2020. Well, I lost about a year because of the whole
of
Harvey.
Okay, that's a whole nother story.
Exactly.
We'll touch on that in a minute. But here's the thing. You're now getting ready to, you've already testified in front of Congress. So what was that like when you got a call saying, would you come to the Hill and talk to us about energy?
So sadly, I have to say openly, and I own it, I had to study up who were my congressional leaders because the House had just, flipped over. I always had an aspiration of being the first female president. I don't have that aspiration anymore. I was always fascinated by politics as a child, watching the Bushes and the Reagans. And so I was excited because I got a chance to take my voice to Washington about a topic I cared about.
What was the committee you testified?
So I testified in front of the subcommittee on energy and commerce, and it was a fascinating experience because it truly represented Americans, all colors, all generations, and all forms of energy. And the uniqueness was we're all struggling with the same challenge. We need to attract this new workforce of talent. So it was fascinating to be in a room with people who, while everyone kind of came at it from their own vantage point from an energy perspective, we all saw that we could come together and agree that we need to do something to skill up the workforce for this energy transition. But what was hilarious was when they called me, my husband Mark, he's an attorney, he works in the industry. He's like, I gotta go to Midland, and I'm like, well, what am I gonna do with Allie? And I thought, I'm gonna take her to Washington. Mrs. Mehnert goes to Washington. I was really excited about it. And so I actually said to Allie, I said, Mommy's gonna take you to Washington. She's like, are we gonna meet Donald Trump? And I was like, well, I don't know about that, but we're gonna, So we actually went up there, and and I took her out of school, and interestingly enough, in the state of Texas.
Best field trip ever.
Oh,
right?
it was, but it wasn't an excused absence. So that kind of got a little bit under my skin. But we got there, and the press were there, and Allie says, "Mommy, they're all here for us." And I said, "No." It just so happened all the Mueller,
all the Mueller investigation was the same day.
It was like it was 2 doors down, so I got to kind of be a part of, witnessing history in action.
Yeah.
It was freezing cold. I finally got my daughter to put a dress on because she's a bit of a ninja, Ninja Turtle fan still. But we had an amazing time. And when I addressed Congress, I actually said, it's an honor to be here with my daughter so she can witness this. And of course, the House chairman said, well, if she weren't asleep. And I look behind me and she's snoring. And there's this picture of it, and it'll be perfect for when she's, 18 and we get to make fun of her and she's, or when she gets married. But it was an amazing experience. And it was very quick. They called me on a Friday, said, can you be here on a Tuesday? And I went, okay, well, I guess.
You spent the weekend cramming. And,
I did. I wrote my testimony. I poured over it. Thankfully, I got a chance to work with one of my friends, Melody Meyer, who helped me, sit through and think through what I wanted to say. And I did, and it was an amazing experience.
And so now they've
come back and they have more questions. And I think that what fascinates me about that is that finally our policy makers are really truly interested in being educated around the facts. A couple of weeks back, so I got to meet members of the Republican delegation, the Democratic delegation. Several weeks back, I actually got to sit at Secretary Clinton's table. She was here in Houston with the Harris County Democrats. And so what's been fascinating about this is, I come from New Orleans. We're traditional Republican roots, and, all of these would-be stereotypes and biases and the things like that. I just think that our world is changing. I think that it's okay for you to think one way about one issue and have a completely different mindset, about a different issue. And I love sitting at the table with both Republicans, Democrats, moderates, progressives. The only ones I can't stand are the extremes, because the extremes,
the extremes are the reason that we've got this
divide. No, absolutely. But I believe that I was always taught to be, I was that girl that wanted to be everybody's friend. Bring people together. Friendships and relationships matter, because if you're going to solve big challenges, you've got to get people on board. You've got to see where everyone can intersect when it comes to common ground. And so it was fascinating. Of course, I went home, and Allie said, "Mommy, what'd you do today?" I said, I got a chance to sit with Miss Secretary Clinton at her table. And she says, "And you didn't invite me to that?" She said, "Mom, so she says, well, are we going to go to the White House and meet Mr. Trump? I'm fascinated by being around policymakers, because I think that there's something to be said for educating them on what the energy industry does, and get the private sector and the public sector to work a little more closely together on the realities of the energy transition.
Right.
We can absolutely reduce emissions. There are lots of things that we can do, but I also think we need to have different minds and different people looking at this.
Right.
And that's where I think the energy transition is the greatest use case for diversity and inclusion of people. And I wrote about that in Scientific American a few months back, and it really says, hey, if we want to get at this quicker, we might want to look at it differently with different people and different mindsets.
Right.
But in this country, as you know, we are divided, and it's very difficult to be that bridge. But I love it. It's fascinating work.
And what you're doing right now probably could not have been done. You, as a young woman, 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago maybe, we probably would have gotten a lot more pushback than what you're getting now. You have got some real traction here and some opportunities to make long-lasting impact. And as a woman, so I want to talk a little bit about what if you can share some sort of other experiences, if you will, of what it was like to be a woman in the industry when you first started out, and just kind of what experiences you've had with people seeing and understanding and recognizing who you are, what you do, and the impact that you're having. What kind of pushback, if any, are you getting?
So I have to be honest, I'm going to own my white privilege. I'm a woman who's educated. I've had a lot of wonderful opportunities that have afforded me the ability to do wonderful assignments, great things. I never felt like the other in my job. Where I started noticing it was when women would come to me, and particularly women of color and men of color. And so what I've tried to do is seek out where I see other happening and intervene. It's very challenging, though, in this country to speak up about race. I encourage my friends, my colleagues, that when they see something that's wrong, they need to say it. Unfortunately, though, because we live in such a divided world, it's very challenging. People choose to remain silent. And I've made conscious decisions since I've become more public to make this a platform. When I see people feeling like the other, I want to explore that and try to understand it through their eyes. I will never claim to know what it feels like to feel like that. Now, I got bullied as a kid. There's no question of that. I was the other kid. I was the kid that didn't get to sit in the back of the cool bus. I had to sit in the front of the bus. I got thrown in the garbage can, by the rough and tumbling kids. It was difficult, I think, as a child growing up, because I always seemed to get along with the older people. I was the teacher's pet, and I had to learn very quickly how to adapt, to my peers. But it was a fascinating time, I think, back then, because we didn't have the internet, we don't have the tools we have today, where you see children, bullying others, and adults, bullying. I've got trolls now, I've got all kinds of weirdos.
Well, you're so active on social media. I'm sure you've attracted some trolls.
I have, and I've even had to stop and say, wow, okay, now I feel, like I've entered this other period, right? Like you've said. But it's, I don't know. For me, I've tried really hard to be conscious about recognizing, seeing that in what's going on in others, and trying to lend my voice.
So, what do you do when women who come to you, either as clients or as part of the Pink Petro community, because there's this vibrant online community of people, women and men, who are conversing about the industry and things that they have, or things that they're dealing with. So when someone comes to you and expresses some sort of an other type of experience, what, if anything, can you do, and what do you do?
Well, I think the first thing is to listen. People want to be heard. That's like 90% of inclusion, right? 90% of inclusion is, I just want you to hear what I have to say.
Right.
And try and understand it from my perspective.
And recognize that my perspective, my point of view is valid.
Absolutely. I've had numerous women of color come to me and say, I want to be a part of what you're a part of. I want to help. I want to bring a different element. And I'm like energized, right? Because if the women's movement can help progress us in the wider movement, right, around people, and I've seen that shift happen. We kind of had this resurgence of women, right? And now we're starting to see a lot of conversation about color, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ, right? To me, that's a beautiful thing. As a marketer, I'm like, coattail on that, I mean, just hey, we're all here because of that common purpose, which is difference matters. Being the other is actually a special thing, and it's something to be celebrated. Because otherwise, if you're not different, you're not standing out.
Right.
You're not making a difference in the world. You're not poking making a dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs says. And
not
so
being a disruptor.
You're not. And there are times when I go in the corner and I wonder, okay, what were you thinking? Just go sit in a chair and be the corporate lady. But that would be boring. That would be a life of just, I left that life. That's like option D, F, if all options fail. And so I've made it a point to make difference and other a part of what I'm doing. And I hope to cultivate, lots of others so that we can all encourage people when they feel like, hey, I'm being left out or I'm being excluded. They look around and it's like, no, I got this, right? I've got this community of people. I've got this, group of women or men who I can rely on.
So we've talked a lot about Pink Petro, but Experience Energy is the platform for people to go and learn about job opportunities in the industry. So that is happening. You're growing that business alongside of Pink Petro. How is Experience Energy going, and what's next for that? And I notice you're wearing green today.
Yeah,
not your usual pink.
No, and
so
a little, yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
There is. So it's, when I conceived Pink Petro and Experience Energy on the cocktail napkin, years ago, in that moment where I was asked, what's a pretty young lady like you doing in a dark, dangerous business? I knew that my calling was to develop a very disruptive business model that gets at two things: communicating the energy narrative and attracting new people to be a part of it. And when I launched my business in 2015, when oil was $50, no one was recruiting. But I was loud about the need for women for the future. I was loud about the future being a different energy future, and that energy is a valuable place to work, despite the fact that we were slashing jobs, laying people off. We were really in a difficult time. So I cultivated a very massive following and got people excited about talking about their work, kept them together. And now that oil prices are stabilizing, now that the energy conversation is global, climate is front and center, equality is front and center, the business is taking off. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe we do a good enough job of telling that story, what energy is, what it does, how it works, so much to the point that we don't attract the new blood we need to drive the new future forward. And so I'm excited. People call me, they don't really know what we were doing. They're like, I want to be a part of it. And I'm like, thanks, come along for the Kool-Aid. But I've been thoughtful about being more meaningful about explaining who we really are. At the end of the day, we care about really two things. And that is telling the story around energy and messaging that in a very compelling way, and attracting new people into this business, because we're not going to get at those targets we have for the energy transition if we don't bring in new perspectives.
And the reality is, our lives depend upon energy.
Yeah,
we can't get anything done without it.
We can't. But, I also recognize that climate change is a reality. 60 inches of water fell in our backyard, 2 years ago. And
so, time out for 1 second. I just want people to know that while she was growing these businesses, while all this stuff was going on, she also lost her home and her place of business during Hurricane Harvey and had to be rescued from her home by a man in a boat.
It's interesting. So I look back on that because it's been 2 years, literally 2 years. And in that moment, I couldn't say it, but that life event actually transformed me as a human being, as a person. My ability to ask for help, my ability to receive help. I remember writing my own narrative, even though the business was, as you knew, it was growing. We were experiencing massive growth. Harvey stopped me dead in my tracks. It was very difficult. But the phone kept ringing. And I remember thinking, well, I could just I'm a storyteller. I could just tell everybody that the hurricane blew me away. It, washed all my things away, my business, and I'm done, and I'll just go back to the corporate chair. No, because then 6 weeks after Harvey, the Harvey Weinstein Me Too case broke, and my phone went bananas. lots of calls, hey, I understand you're in this diversity space, And so what we try to do is we try to take these very provocative topics, like Me Too, like climate, the sticky things that people don't want to talk about, but offer some balanced perspectives, right? And I feel like now more than ever, I'm more credible to talk about the energy transition, more passionate about it, because of my own personal experience of losing my home, because seeing countless neighbors, my neighborhood lose, everything, seeing neighbors to our north, and to, to all the states across the U.S., we've had more catastrophes since Harvey. So knowing, hey, I'm right in the thick of being able to affect that change absolutely gets me up every day. So that's why I love what I do.
Well, I love what you do, and I know you have a massive, passionate following of people, not only across the country, but literally around the world. Your Her World Energy Forum that you do every spring on International Women's Day has skyrocketed and taken off just like your business is. And I think you're setting an incredible example, not only for Allie, your beautiful, sweet daughter, but for so many young girls, especially young girls and boys, about what you can do when you really put your mind to it and when you let passion drive you. And even though it's scary, you gotta keep going. So if there were one thing that you would want to leave our audience with today, what would that be?
It gets back to the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? I believe that life is not indefinite, as we know. We see every day our friends, family, suffer through loss. And I think it's up to us to find deep within us what makes us uncomfortable and fearful, and own that fear and turn that into something that is going to make us better, and it's going to bring about change in the world. So I would say, what would you do if you weren't afraid?
Well,
Go do it.
You're doing it. You are doing it, girl. And you are making a huge difference. And I'm proud to call you a friend. And I know
Likewise.
we're going to have so many more conversations. And you've got a lot to offer. And people will be hearing and seeing a lot of Katie Mehnert in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We have to do this more often.
Yes,
I really miss being on camera with you.
Okay, well, we'll work on that.
Maybe it'll be Experience Energy TV.
Well, we'll work on that.
We'll work on that.
Yeah. So in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and listening, and for giving our guests permission to speak, and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for giving our guests permission to speak, and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. If the mission of Our Voices Matter resonates with you, please like, subscribe, download, and share, and then join the conversation, because it really is going to take all of us to make a difference.